Last month, world leaders, they gathered in Auschwitz. They marked the liberation 70 years ago of one of the most notorious Nazi concentration camps. But as the book illustrates, many of the liberated Holocaust survivors, they were in fact not freed, many spending months, if not even years, in the same prison camps that they suffered under Nazi rule. Now, earlier today, I spoke with Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Eric Lichtblau, who writes for the New York Times on the subject. He's also author of the book, The Nazis Next Door, How America Became a Safe Haven for Hitler's Men. You know, I think, like many, I had this perception that after we liberated these camps, that the prevailing image was some GI would say to the survivors, you know, have at these guards for what they did to you. I think that's a perception a lot of us had. I honestly had no idea until I saw your column and then went through your book that for months, if not years, some of these folks, the conditions they had to live in, they were still kept in the same pajamas that the Nazis issued them. In many cases, they treated the Nazi guards as well, if not better than them, behind camp walls. They were treated as POWs, some of them dying of malnutrition and disease in the months after we liberated them. How pervasive was this, Eric?
Well, it was widespread for months and months after the liberation. You know, you had tens of thousands of Holocaust survivors who were living in decrepit conditions, who were, as you say, were wearing the same notorious striped uniforms that the Nazis had put them in. They were bunked side by side with Nazis, with very little to eat. The conditions were so bad that an official that Truman sent over to inspect the camps said that the camps were run much like the Nazis had run them, amazingly. But that's been essentially lost to history. You know, as you say, we think of the liberation of the survivors. We think of them, you know, leaving the camps and you know, starting their lives. But most of them didn't leave the camps for years after the liberation.
In fact, that envoy that Truman sent, when he came back with that report, General Patton, none too pleased, and as you uncovered in your book, Patton didn't even consider Jews humans.
Right. Yeah. Just amazing. I think that's something else that's been overlooked in history. You have General Patton, who's sort of deified as a war hero. He's the subject of a best-selling book now by Bill O'Reilly. But he treated the survivors under him. He ran these displaced persons camps as in his own words, subhuman. He got this report from Truman's emissary, and he was furious because he said that the Jews didn't deserve to be treated as human beings, and he described them as locusts. He had all sorts of choice words that he wrote in his journal in response to this attack on him.
Eric, how much of this had to do with the fact that, as you said, there were tens of thousands of survivors and that we weren't prepared, we and the other liberating forces, as to a plan what to do with them, versus a lot of folks, frankly, didn't really care and, as you said, in many ways, treated them just like prisoners of war?
I do think that was a big part of it. The Allies were overwhelmed by the refugee crisis. You had millions of displaced persons, as many as 6 or 7 million across Europe, and repatriation was a huge problem. The system was overwhelmed, and the Jews in particular didn't want to, for obvious reasons, go back to the countries where the Nazis had taken them from. They didn't want to go back to Poland or Austria or Hungary because that's their towns and areas had been decimated, and so they were stuck in these displaced persons camps for years. But I think part of it was also the lingering anti-Semitism of that time, which you clearly saw in the form of General Patton and others. You had people in the military who were actively pushing to empty out some of the German towns and put the survivors there. They said that the survivors should have the benefit of you know, a warm house and meals and showers, and kick the Germans out of their houses. But that idea was rejected by Patton and others.
You know, in your book, The Nazis Next Door, again, there's a perception, I think, of us that the Germans that we took in out of maybe calculated value, that maybe scientists would help us militarily or in space, but also we were worried that maybe the Soviets would snatch them up. I thought it was a small number, but as you detail in the book, we're talking about thousands. And if you want to just give an idea of just how bad some of these guys were, talk about Otto von Bolschwing. In many ways, he was the architect of, or at least one of the ideas behind the final solution. And talk about what we did for him.
Right. Yeah, there were many thousands, as many as 10,000 Nazis and Nazi collaborators who got into America. We think of Latin America as the destination where they all ended up, but thousands ended up here. And von Bolschwing was a Prussian baron who was among the worst. He was a top aide to Adolf Eichmann in the Jewish Affairs Office. He wrote these hideous policy papers on how to terrorize and destroy the Jews. He not only made it into America after the war, but he worked as a CIA agent and had protection, had official protection from the CIA, because they thought he could be of value as an anti-Soviet spy. Because of the work he had done with his Nazis, with the Nazis, and sort of a case of intelligence just run amok. His past war crimes were ignored, and he was allowed to live in America for 25 years before anyone else realized who he really was.
And as you reported, it wasn't just literally the rocket scientists here. We took people of sometimes minimal value,
right.
And we covered for them. It was really, as you said, through both the OSS and the CIA, and more than that, even when our own State Department objected to some of this, we more than just looked the other way. Those agencies helped cover up who these guys were, right?
Absolutely, yeah. These were not just scientists who had an obvious technical value. These were people at the CIA and other agencies were using as spies, often bad spies. They weren't even particularly valuable in this new Cold War against the Soviets that was developing. They were ex-Nazis who had dubious spy skills that they brought to America, but they were used for years and years through the 50s and 60s, not only by the CIA, by the FBI, by the Pentagon. As Cold War assets. By my count, there were as many as 1,000 ex-Nazis who were employed as intelligence agents around the world, in Europe, in Latin America, in the Middle East, and in the United States. And the intelligence that they brought to the United States was not only unhelpful at times, but at times a few of them even turned out to be Soviet double agents. So these were ex-Nazis who were used in the Cold War who were on the Soviet payroll.
Well, I got to tell you, I read your column this past week, and then got my hands on the book, The Nazis Next Door, How America Became a Safe Haven for Hitler's Men. And it literally is infuriating when you read a part of history, and I thought I knew it really well, but just how pervasive we mistreated some of the victims and the survivors of the Holocaust, while at the same end giving safe passage to some of the worst actors around. And I think it's a tough chapter of history, but I strongly recommend anybody, if they want a complete one, to read it. Eric, I really appreciate a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
And we'll be right back.